The garage door creaked open in the dim light of dawn, revealing shadows that had been hidden from the world for years. What lay beyond those makeshift walls would challenge everything people thought they knew about Gas Monkey Garage and the man who built it from nothing into an automotive empire. Richard Rawlings had always been known for his bold moves, his eye for diamonds in the rough, and his ability to turn rust into gold. But what the cameras never captured, what the television audiences never saw, was the collection that lived in the shadows. A secret vault of automotive history that would make even the most seasoned collectors question their understanding of what it means to preserve the past. The story begins not with fanfare or publicity, but with silence. For 8 years, a 1970 Plymouth Cuda AAR had sat in darkness, known only to Richard's inner circle. One of only 2,724 ever made, this wasn't just another muscle car. It was a time capsule wrapped in metal and memories, representing an era when American automotive engineering reached its zenith. Aaron Kaufman had found it in Oklahoma, buried in a barn, that time forgot. The discovery came through a network of contacts that Richard had cultivated over decades in the business, old-timers who knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak. The owner was Margaret, an 9-year-old woman whose story would break your heart and restore your faith in humanity all at once. She had bought the car new in 1970, driving it exactly 847 miles before parking it forever. The reason? Her husband had died just 2 weeks after the purchase, and the Cuda was supposed to be their retirement road trip car. For 53 years, Margaret couldn't bear to look at it. The car sat as a monument to dreams deferred and love lost, gathering dust while the world outside changed beyond recognition. The barn itself had become a shrine of sorts, with Margaret's husband's tools still hanging exactly where he had left them, his work clothes still folded on a shelf, as if he might return at any moment to finish what he had started. When Aaron called Richard about the find, the Gas Monkey founder thought it was a prank. A numbers-matching AAR with 847 original miles? That was unicorn territory, the kind of discovery that happens once in a lifetime. The AAR, ITNAS, which stood for All-American Racers, MESN, was Plymouth's answer to the Trans Am Racing Series, featuring a 340 cubic inch small block with triple 2-barrel carburetors, a distinctive hood scoop, and side exhaust that announced its presence from blocks away. But Margaret wasn't interested in just any buyer. She had 3 requirements that would have killed most deals before they started. First, whoever bought her husband's dream car had to promise to drive it, not trailer it to shows, not lock it away in a climate-controlled garage, but actually drive it as her husband had intended. Second, they had to send her a photo every year showing the car being enjoyed, proof that it was living the life that had been cut short. The third requirement was the most unusual of all. Margaret wanted the new owners to take her husband's ashes, which she had kept in a small urn on her mantle for over 5 decades, and scatter them at the first car show where the Cuda would be displayed. It was a request that spoke to something deeper than ownership. It was about completing a journey that had been interrupted by tragedy, about honoring a love that transcended death itself. Richard agreed to all 3 conditions without hesitation, understanding that some transactions go far beyond money. 6 months later, he and his team took Margaret and her husband to their first car show in 53 years. The event was held at a classic car gathering in Tulsa, where hundreds of automotive enthusiasts had come to celebrate American muscle. When Margaret told their story, standing beside the pristine Cuda that gleamed like new despite its age, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Grown men who had spent their lives around cars found themselves moved to tears by the simple power of love and loss. But the Cuda was just the beginning. The hidden collection held stories that defied logic and challenged conventional wisdom about what makes a car worth preserving. Take the 1969 Dodge Charger RT that literally found Richard instead of the other way around. A car that would teach him that sometimes the best deals are the ones that seem impossible from the start. It was 2 a.m. at a gas station outside Austin, one of those fluorescent-lit islands of civilization in the Texas darkness. Richard was exhausted from a buying trip that had been a complete bust, cursing his luck while pumping gas into his truck when a young man approached him. The kid, maybe 20 years old, seemed desperate as he asked if Richard was really the guy from Gas Monkey Garage.
And grow a little bit, and I'd kind of gotten to the top of that mountain, being Discovery, and there wasn't anything else for me to do there. So
there was something in his voice, a combination of hope and desperation that made Richard pay attention despite his fatigue. The Charger belonged to the kid's grandfather, a man named Earl who had been running NHRA drag races in the 1970s when the sport was still young and dangerous. Earl had built the car himself, starting with a factory RT and transforming it into a legitimate quarter-mile warrior. The car had time slips dating back to 1973, trophy photos showing Earl grinning beside his creation, and a logbook documenting every modification, every race, every victory and defeat. When Earl passed away, the family wanted to sell the documented race car to pay medical bills that had accumulated during his final months. But Tommy, that was the kid's name, knew they were about to let automotive history slip away for a fraction of its worth. The family saw an old car that needed work. Tommy saw a piece of drag racing heritage that deserved better than being parted out or sold to someone who wouldn't understand its significance. Tommy made Richard an offer that was unprecedented in the collector car world. He asked Richard to buy the car for the $15,000 his family needed, but with a twist that showed wisdom beyond his years. Tommy would work for Gas Monkey for free until he had earned enough to buy the car back. It was a proposal that spoke to something deeper than business, a young man's determination to preserve his grandfather's legacy, even if it meant sacrificing his own time and energy. Richard was looking at a car easily worth $80,000 restored, being offered for $15,000 with free labor included. It should have been the easiest decision of his career, but something about the kid's determination made Richard see beyond the transaction. This wasn't about making money. It was about preserving a family legacy, about understanding that some things matter more than profit margins. Tommy worked nights and weekends for 2 years, learning everything he could about automotive restoration while earning back every penny. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, understanding that he wasn't just working off a debt, but preparing himself to be a proper steward of his grandfather's creation. When the time came, Richard sold the car back to Tommy for exactly what he had paid, $15,000. 3 years later, Tommy still brings the car by the shop to show his progress, a living reminder that collecting isn't about owning, it's about stewarding. The philosophy became clearer with each story. Hidden behind those makeshift walls was a 1967 Shelby GT 500 that had violated every rule Richard had about collecting. It wasn't complete, it wasn't affordable to restore, and it barely qualified as a car when he found it. But sometimes, the most important discoveries are the ones that challenge your preconceptions about what's possible. The Shelby had been sitting in pieces in a shipping container for 15 years, the casualty of a divorce that had torn apart more than just a marriage. The previous owner, a successful businessman from California, had started an ambitious restoration project in the early 2000s, dreaming of bringing the legendary muscle car back to its former glory. But when his marriage fell apart, so did his dreams. His ex-wife, in a moment of spite that would haunt her for years, sold the container contents to a scrap dealer without understanding what she was destroying. Richard bought the contents sight unseen for $25,000, a decision that could have been financial suicide. The auction listing was vague, miscellaneous Ford parts, container lot 247, N7, with no photos and no guarantees. It was a leap of faith based on nothing more than a hunch, and the kind of calculated risk that had built his empire. When the container arrived at Gas Monkey, it was like the world's most expensive jigsaw puzzle. Boxes of parts mixed with hardware and mouse nests. No instructions, no organization, just hope and determination. But while cataloging the chaos, Aaron made a discovery that changed everything. Taped inside the original spare tire, well, protected from decades of neglect, was a manila envelope containing documents that would rewrite the car's history. The original sales receipt, the original title, and something that made Richard's hands shake, a handwritten letter from Carroll Shelby himself, written in the distinctive scrawl that automotive enthusiasts would recognize anywhere. The letter thanked the original owner for his contribution to American motorsports and revealed that this wasn't just any GT 500. It was one of the development mules used for testing before production began, driven by Shelby team drivers like Ken Miles and Bob Bondurant, tested at tracks across the country, before being sold to a collector who was sworn to secrecy about its racing pedigree. The car had been a guinea pig for innovations that would later appear in production Shelbys, making it not just rare but historically significant. Carroll Shelby's words in that letter would haunt Richard for months. This car has stories to tell that won't be understood for decades. Take care of them. The automotive legend wasn't talking about maintenance schedules or preservation techniques. He was talking about the responsibility that comes with being a guardian of history, about understanding that some objects carry the weight of human achievement and deserve to be treated accordingly. That responsibility became personal with the next car in the collection, a 1970 Dodge Challenger T, that represented more than automotive history. It was the foundation of Richard's entire relationship with cars, the spark that ignited a lifelong passion that would eventually build an empire. When Richard was 8 years old, his father had taken him to a car show in Dallas where a Challenger TA sat gleaming in orange with black stripes. The owner, a kind man who understood the power of automotive dreams, had let the wide-eyed boy sit behind the wheel. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of leather and the promise of power, Richard understood that cars weren't just transportation, they were magic, freedom, possibility wrapped in steel and chrome. For 30 years, Richard carried the memory of that car, promising himself that someday he would find that exact vehicle. The search became an obsession, a quest that took him to car shows across the country, following leads that usually led nowhere. When he finally located it through a network of collectors and enthusiasts, the car was in pieces, and the owner wanted $150,000, insane money for a pile of parts, even for a TA, but the VIN matched the photos Richard had kept from that childhood car show, proof that dreams sometimes do come true. The restoration took 3 years and cost twice what Richard had budgeted, but every time he fired up that engine, he was 8 years old again, experiencing automotive magic for the first time. The T, A, which stood for Trans Am, was Dodge's answer to the SCCA, Trans Am Racing Series, featuring a 346-pack engine, distinctive side exhaust, and aerodynamic aids that made it one of the most aggressive-looking cars of the muscle car era. The real validation came when Richard tracked down the original owner, now in his 80 seconds, and invited him to see the completed restoration. The elderly man, whose name was Frank, drove 4 hours from his home in Oklahoma to Gas Monkey and broke down crying when he saw the car. He had sold it in 1985 to pay for his daughter's wedding and had regretted the decision every day since, wondering what had become of the car that had been his pride and joy for 15 years. For 3 hours, Frank shared stories about the car that no documentation could ever capture. The first time he had beaten a Camaro at a stoplight, the road trips he had taken with his wife before the kids were born, the Saturday mornings spent washing and waxing it in his driveway, while neighbors gathered to admire his mechanical masterpiece. He taught Richard that collecting was about being part of a chain of people who understood that some things are worth preserving, not for profit, but for the stories they carry, the memories they hold, the dreams they represent. But preservation doesn't always mean keeping things original. Sometimes it means imagining what could be, which brought Richard to his most controversial project, a 1969 Camaro Z28 that challenged every assumption about restoration versus modification, about honoring the past versus embracing the future. Project Phoenix, as it came to be known, started as a car that was completely beyond salvation. Totaled in an accident in 1974, it had been sitting as scrap for decades when Richard found it in a junkyard outside Houston. The car had been hit so hard that the frame was twisted, the body was crushed, and most of the original components were either destroyed or missing. By any rational measure, it should have been recycled into refrigerators and beer cans. Instead of letting automotive DNA die, Richard asked a different question. What would this car be if it were built today? The answer was radical. Carbon fiber body panels that looked identical to the original steel, but weighed half as much, modern suspension that could handle like a modern sports car while maintaining the classic stance, fuel injection that provided reliability and efficiency while preserving the sound and fury of a big block V8. The project included a 6-speed transmission, ABS brakes, modern air conditioning, and a sound system that would have been science fiction in 1969. It was everything purists hate about modified classics, except for one crucial detail: the original car was already destroyed. Richard wasn't butchering a perfect classic. He was giving new life to automotive DNA that was headed for the crusher, creating something that honored the past while embracing the future. The project divided the car community exactly as Richard expected. Young enthusiasts thought it was revolutionary, a perfect blend of classic style and modern performance. Middle-aged collectors were conflicted but intrigued, understanding the logic even if they questioned the execution. The older generation, the keepers of automotive tradition, were expected to hate it with the passion of true believers defending their faith. But at the first car show where Project Phoenix was displayed, something unexpected happened. A 75-year-old gentleman named Walter spent an hour examining every detail, running his hands over the carbon fiber panels, listening to the engine idle, asking technical questions that showed deep understanding of both old and new technology. Finally, he approached Richard with a surprising observation. "Son, this is what I would have built in 1969 if I'd had the technology." Walter had been a Chevrolet engineer during the original Z28's development, one of the men who had created the legend that Richard was now reinterpreting. His blessing validated Richard's belief that they hadn't destroyed history. They had continued it, evolved it, proven that the spirit of innovation that created the original muscle cars was still alive and well. That moment validated Richard's belief that preservation isn't always about maintaining the status quo. Sometimes it's about understanding the spirit behind the creation and finding new ways to express it. The philosophy extended beyond individual cars to encompass entire automotive experiences, leading to Richard's most ambitious project yet, a complete 1950s service station, functional down to the last detail. The project began with an email from a subscriber whose grandfather had owned a Texaco station in small-town Kansas for 40 years. When he passed, the family didn't know what to do with decades of accumulated memorabilia, vintage signs that had advertised products long forgotten, tools that had been used to service cars that were now classics, pumps that had dispensed gasoline when it cost 25 cents a gallon, even the original cash register that had recorded thousands of transactions in an era when customer service meant something. The granddaughter, a teacher named Sarah, had seen Gas Monkey's appreciation for automotive history and offered the collection to Richard. But she didn't want money day. She wanted a promise that everything would be assembled into something that honored her grandfather's memory and showed people what car culture used to be like. When getting gas was a social experience, and mechanics knew their customers by name, Richard realized that cars don't exist in isolation. They exist within a culture, an experience, a time and place that shapes how they're perceived and enjoyed. If Gas Monkey was going to preserve automotive history, they needed to preserve the complete experience. The sights, sounds, and rituals that made car culture what it was before it became sanitized and corporate. Kids today had never heard a V8 idle while waiting for a fill-up, never experienced the ritual of full service where an attendant would check your oil, clean your windshield, and ask about your family while the tank filled. They had never understood that cars were adventures rather than appliances, that driving was about more than getting from point A to point B. The philosophy that emerged from these experiences challenged conventional collecting wisdom. Richard developed what he called the soul test, a subjective measure that had nothing to do with rarity, value, or condition, and everything to do with the stories cars carried, the lives they had touched, the dreams they had enabled. A beat-up 1975 Duster passed the soul test, despite being worthless on paper. Richard had bought it from a 6-year-old kid named Marcus for $500, to save all the money the boy had after saving for 2 years from his job at a local fast food restaurant. The kid's father had died in a construction accident. His mother was working 2 jobs to keep the family afloat, and this basket case was his only hope for transportation to an after-school job that would help pay the bills. The Duster was a mess, rust holes in the quarter panels, an engine that barely ran, brakes that were more suggestion than reality. Any rational person would have advised Marcus to save his money for something more reliable. But Richard saw something else, a young man's determination to take responsibility for his family's welfare, to find a way forward despite circumstances that would have defeated many adults. Instead of flipping the car for profit, Richard made a deal that would change both their lives. Gas Monkey would fix everything wrong with the Duster, and there was a lot wrong with it, and Marcus would work it off on weekends, learning automotive repair while earning back every penny. It was an investment in human potential as much as automotive restoration. 6 months later, Marcus had learned more about automotive repair than most people learn in years, not because he had to, but because he wanted to understand the machine that was giving him freedom. He absorbed knowledge with the hunger of someone who understood that education was the key to a better life, that every skill he learned was another tool in his arsenal for building a future. When the restoration was complete and Marcus's mother saw her son's reliable, safe transportation, she cried, not because the car was beautiful, but because someone had cared enough to teach her son something valuable, to invest in his future when the world seemed determined to write him off. That was soul, the intangible quality that made a car worth preserving, regardless of its market value. The collection expanded to include vehicles that surprised even Richard's closest associates. A 1985 Toyota pickup with 400,000 miles earned its place not for rarity, but for representing reliability as a virtue, a quality that American car culture had forgotten during the dark days of the 1970s and early 1980s. It had belonged to a contractor named Jim, who used the same truck to build houses for 35 years. Same truck, same job, same commitment to showing up every day and getting work done. Jim had bought the truck new when Toyota was still considered a joke by American car enthusiasts, when made in Japan was synonymous with cheap and disposable. But the little pickup had proven its worth through decades of abuse, carrying loads that would have broken larger trucks, starting every morning regardless of weather, asking for nothing more than basic maintenance and the occasional repair. When Jim finally retired, he couldn't bear to sell the truck that had been his partner for so many years. Instead, he donated it to Gas Monkey with a simple request. Make sure people understand that a good truck is like a good friend. It's there when you need it, doesn't complain about the work, and gets better with age. A 1992 Honda Civic hatchback represented an entire generation's introduction to car culture, a reminder that automotive passion isn't limited to American muscle or European exotics. The Civic had been owned by a young woman named Lisa, who had discovered the joy of driving through late-night adventures with friends, weekend trips to the coast, and the simple pleasure of a car that responded to her inputs with precision and enthusiasm. While older collectors dismissed imports as inferior to American muscle, Richard understood that real cars are the ones that make people fall in love with driving, regardless of their origin or horsepower. The Civic had been modified with the enthusiasm of youth, lowered suspension, aftermarket wheels, a sound system that could wake the dead, but every modification had been done with love and attention to detail. Lisa had sold the car when she got married and started a family, trading youthful enthusiasm for practical responsibility. But she had never forgotten the freedom it represented, the sense of possibility that came from having your own transportation and the whole world spread out before you like an endless highway. The most profound lesson in collecting philosophy came from an empty space in the garage where a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda had sat for 5 years. Numbers matching and pristine, it was worth 6 figures and represented everything collectors dream of finding: original paint, documented history, and the kind of condition that made grown men weep with envy. But when a subscriber named David called to say his house had burned down, destroying his father's identical Barracuda that had been in the family for 40 years, Richard made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He gave the car away, not sold. Gave. Because sometimes being a steward of automotive history means knowing when to let something go to where it's needed most. David's father had bought the Barracuda new in 1970, driving it to work every day for 20 years before retiring it to weekend duty. It had been David's first car, the vehicle that taught him to drive, to appreciate mechanical things, to understand that cars could be more than transportation. When the fire took everything David owned, including irreplaceable family photos and his father's tools, the loss of the Barracuda felt like losing his father all over again. Richard's gift didn't just replace a car, it restored a connection to the past, a tangible link to memories that couldn't be destroyed by fire or flood, or the passage of time. It was a reminder that the best collections are the ones that serve something larger than ego or investment potential. The secret collection represented more than accumulated vehicles. It was a living museum of automotive culture, a repository of stories that would otherwise be lost to time. Each car had chosen Gas Monkey as much as Richard had chosen them, creating a collection bound together not by value or rarity, but by the human connections that gave them meaning. As word of the hidden collection began to spread through the automotive community, Richard realized that preservation was a community effort. Some of the best finds had come from subscribers and viewers who understood that automotive history was at risk of being lost, that every barn find saved was a victory against the forces of time and neglect. The collection became a rallying point for people who believed that some things are worth saving, not because they're valuable, but because they matter. It attracted stories from across the country. A widow who had her husband's race car sitting in a garage, afraid to sell it to someone who wouldn't understand its significance. A young man who had inherited his grandfather's hot rod project and didn't know how to finish it. A family who had found a rare muscle car in their recently purchased home and wanted to make sure it went to someone who would appreciate its history. The future held promises of even greater discoveries. Negotiations were underway for what could be the find of the century, a barn find involving a famous racing driver from the 1960s and a car everyone thought had been destroyed decades ago. The details were still confidential, but the potential discovery had Richard more excited than he had been in years. If the deal came together, it would provide material for a year-long documentation series unlike anything ever filmed, following every aspect of bringing a legend back to life. But more than that, it would prove that automotive history is still being written, that there are still discoveries to be made for those willing to look beyond the obvious. But the real success wasn't measured in profit margins or television ratings. Standing among the machines and stories that filled the hidden garage, Richard understood that success was something entirely different. Success was knowing that stories had been saved that would otherwise have been lost. Success was connecting people with automotive experiences they never thought possible. Success was proving that car culture wasn't just about the past, it was about carrying passion forward to future generations. The secret was out now. The hidden collection had been revealed, its stories shared, its philosophy explained. But the biggest secret of all remained unchanged. This was never really about cars. It was about people, about passion, about the belief that some things are worth preserving, not because they're valuable, but because they represent the best of human creativity, ingenuity, and dreams. In garages across the country, people were working on their own automotive stories. Maybe restoring a car that had been in the family for generations. Maybe learning about the automotive history in their own communities. Maybe just paying attention to the cars around them and the stories they could tell. Every person had automotive stories in their lives. The car their grandfather drove, the first car they ever loved, the vehicle that got them through tough times. Those stories mattered. Those connections to automotive culture were what kept it alive, one story at a time, one car at a time, one person at a time. The hidden collection at Gas Monkey Garage had become more than a secret vault of automotive treasures. It had become proof that when people understand their role as stewards of history, when they recognize that preservation is about stories rather than objects, when they realize that the best collections are the ones that bring people together rather than set them apart, something magical happens. Cars stop being just machines and become bridges between generations, connections between strangers, and guardians of memories that might otherwise fade away. In the end, that's what made the collection truly valuable. Not the metal and chrome and horsepower, but the human stories that gave them life and meaning. The garage door would close again, but the stories would continue. New discoveries would be made, new connections formed, new chapters written in the ongoing saga of automotive culture. And somewhere in the shadows, another forgotten car would be waiting for someone who understood that preservation isn't about ownership, it's about love, responsibility, and the belief that some things are too important to let disappear into the darkness of forgotten history.